Board info and training session, where we will be talking about the purpose of the Community Editorial Board, the responsibilities and roles and requirements of the individuals who are serving on the board, and also offering a little bit about how to craft a well drafted and a data-backed, data-driven column each month. This conversation is going to be facilitated by myself, Mercy Quaye, and you'll be hearing from Bruce Putterman, Elizabeth Hamilton, and Steve Busemeyer. We have a Q&A feature down at the bottom of the screen, so please feel free to ask questions at any time. And at the end of the session, we will dive into your questions. You might have seen his name pop up in your emails or perhaps pop up on your social media channels, but Kyle Constable will be moderating the Q&A session when that time comes. And without delay, we will dive right in. So I'm going to hand it over to this fine group of folks to say a few words and introduce themselves, starting with you, Bruce.
Well, thanks, Mercy, and thank you at home or at your office or wherever you are for joining us tonight. And thanks for your participation in the critical work of the Connecticut Mirror. So our mission is to inform Connecticut about public policy and to hold government accountable and to amplify diverse voices and perspectives. And this Community Editorial Board, which is our debut Community Editorial Board, it's a new concept for us that Stephen Busemeyer actually suggested, and you'll hear from him in a few minutes. So the Community Editorial Board really is a way of delivering on the first part of that mission and the third part of the mission. So inherent in informing Connecticut about public policy, or the impact of public policy, is informing everybody in Connecticut about public policy and the impact of public policy on everybody. And we have recognized, to be frank, that while we cover a lot of ground, that there are still some communities that perhaps we don't know as much about or have as deep a relationship with as we would like to. And so a part of the objective of the Community Editorial Board is to raise up voices from some of those communities that we haven't historically covered as much in our reporting and our publishing. And so for that, I thank you all for your interest in participating in the Community Editorial Board, and I will turn it over to our executive editor and my partner, Beth Hamilton.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, Bruce said it beautifully, so I'm not going to belabor that point, but I do believe that as much as journalists inform our readers can help inform us. And so we're looking to all of you, whether you join the Community Editorial Board or not, to share your ideas with us. I love getting emails and calls from readers, and we value your input and your ideas. We have a tips line that we get tips in all the time and we follow up on them. A lot of the time they don't go anywhere, but sometimes they do. And it's always a wonderful surprise. But more than that, I'm interested in your ideas about the work we are doing and your feedback about how we're reporting on the communities that you live in and that you understand. We cover statewide public policies, not local communities, but the issues are pretty much universal. And so I'm always interested in hearing from you. And thank you very much again for being here tonight. And I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, you know, you guys have said it. I don't think I have anything to add. No, I'm just kidding. There's never been a moment where I really didn't have anything to add.
That's true.
So one of the biggest challenges any news outlet has is really making a connection with the community. And I've been working in newsrooms and opinion journalism for many, many years. And we've tried in different ways to find ways to connect with the community. some more successful than others. And this is really an attempt to do that in a new way. Now, opinion pieces, editorials, op-eds, columns, in a lot of ways, you know, we talk about engagement with the community, but these things really can be megaphones, right? When the newspaper or the website is really saying, hey, here's the point of view, and yelling it at some other people. The idea here is to create maybe a little bit more engagement with the community, invite people to interact with us, with members of the Community Editorial Board, and create a little bit more of a connection, a little bit more of a dialogue than a megaphone situation. So to that end, we're reaching out, and we hope other people will reach out to us, and somehow we can create this, some inertia here that is more resembles a conversation than a shouting match. So let's see if we can do it.
I mean, and it's a fantastic way to transition into a bit of conversation between the four of us about why this and why now. And so I just want to hear from the three of you, and I'll jump in as well. But, you know, why is this an important endeavor to embark on today in Connecticut? Bruce, I saw you take your mic off, so I'll kick it over to you.
I only took the mic off to respond last, but I mean, I guess it's always important, but I think that COVID has, frankly, COVID and the the movement for racial justice that kind of emerged in the midst of COVID caused all of us to think a little bit differently about the work that we do, just like it caused so many people across the state of Connecticut to take stock in their lives and what was important to them. And we've reported on a lot of that, you know, people changing jobs, et cetera. So I think that's the why now. The why this, I guess, one thing I would say is that this is one of several strategies for us to connect better with community, as Beth and Stephen have talked about. And I mean, quite honestly, you know, we kind of borrowed, if you will, he says, winking, this idea from the Hartford Courant, which tried this a couple of years ago. And I remember even at the time, and I wasn't even the publisher of the Mirror at that time, I thought it was a really cool idea. And then Stephen came over, he talked a little bit more about it, and we decided to pull the trigger. We got a grant from the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving to kick this off. It's a startup grant, so thank you to them for that. And some of the other strategies related to deepening our coverage and amplifying diverse voices and perspectives include, you know, very concerted efforts around staff diversity and deepening staff diversity. Sourcing, we are actively looking to diversify our sourcing. And so it's a kind of a combination of lots of things that we hope will lead to more people seeing more of themselves in more of our work as we go forward to better capture that notion of reporting on the impact of public policy on all people in Connecticut.
Yeah, and you know, I'll just jump in and say, true to the name of the publication, right? The last thing you said was ensuring that people see themselves in our work, right? I think that there is something about the publication and the way we source and the way we talk about issues and who we engage to talk about those issues, reflecting the communities that they hope to be a part of. And so for me, the why this right now, I think, Bruce, you've said it beautifully, sort of, we are at a moment where you see, you know, a bit of a racial reckoning coming to a head at the same time as, you know, all the, you know, centuries of oppression and decades of the fruits of those oppressions coming to a head during the pandemic. And then really just having the opportunity to take a beat. You know, everyone's working from home, take a beat and actually think about, you know, what matters and how can we sort of recruit folks and enlist folks into the work to help us talk about what matters in the best way possible. Stephen, Beth, did you guys have anything that you wanted to add to that before I move on?
No, not really, other than, you know, Stephen joined the Connecticut Mirror staff a year ago. And it was a year of real growth for us as an organization. And I think that the conversation about the Community Editorial Board was born out of that growth. If he hadn't joined the organization, along with a lot of other people over the last year, we may not have had this conversation. We may not have come to this. So I'm really appreciative that he raised this issue. And I just think it shows that when you add more voices and ideas to the conversation, good things happen.
Gee, thanks, Beth. That's really nice of you to say. I'll just add that I kind of hope that this is an antidote to the negative things that we see on social media. There's just so much. I'm sure that everybody who's watching this hates the parts of Facebook and Twitter that I hate as well. Not to say that the work we do here as a body has to be overly genteel. It doesn't mean we have to pull any punches or anything like that, but it means we have to, I think it's incumbent on us to write with reason, think clearly, think openly, and try to make a real contribution to the discussion, not just add a point of view, but add a way for people to access that point of view and for people to access their own points of view and things they may not have known. Also, as far as the timing goes, what I think that one of the strengths of having a community editorial board is that with a wide group of people, there's a wide group of expertise. Now, the opinion section in most newspapers, certainly at ours, is kind of, we play catch, right? When somebody sends an opinion piece in, we get it and we edit it, put a nice headline on it and put it in the paper. That's just, we're receiving, right? We're passive about it. I'm hoping we can be a little bit more active about opinionating on policies as they appear. So I'm sure Mercy's going to get into this more, Bruce. I hope that when things happen over the course of the next few months, that some among you will say, hey, this is something that I really know about, and I can bring a very unique perspective to this that otherwise might not have gone expressed. And I hope we can do it quickly. I hope we can be relevant. I hope we can really push the conversation as it's happening. And I think if we do that, yeah, we have more of a chance at doing all those things, being relevant, being current, and making a contribution.
So Mercy, and I think that's really well said, Stephen. I just want to echo the importance of engagement to us. And I'm not going to ask anybody for money, but the part of our ethos is engagement. And so I'm glad you raised that, because our whole model is built around engaging people, and ultimately it's engagement that causes people to join our work financially as well. But more importantly, we have an opinion section right now, as it is, as Stephen referenced, called Viewpoints. And we have, not only do we kind of just catch viewpoints for the most part, we tend to catch all viewpoints that come our way and kind of put them back out on the page. And the Community Editorial Board is an opportunity to bring a greater degree of professionalism to the writing and to the thinking. And Mercy, who we hired specifically for this role and because she is writing a column, and thank goodness you came along, Mercy, you're the perfect person for this. And it's been a pleasure working with you in these first couple of months as we've tried getting this off the ground. So thank you. But Mercy and Stephen will be available to help people who want their voice to be heard to articulate or express their voice in as professional a way as possible, which helps you in your advocacy and helps us in terms of the professionalism and the quality of the viewpoints that we publish.
I think that's perfect. I'm going to move on to this next slide, and to the folks listening at home, we're going to try to be as respectful to your time as possible. We started a few minutes late, and so we might go just a few minutes after, but we'll be as respectful to your time as possible. So diving right in, and you've heard these things, we've talked about them, we're creating a space for community members to talk about the issues that impact Connecticut from their perspective. Where are you in this state, right? What are the issues that are happening in your community that we might not have a line of sight into because we're not there, right? We also want to amplify diverse voices and perspectives. Stephen and Bruce talked about viewpoints as sort of being a catch-all, right? The way you can think about the Community Editorial Board is in the sense of not being just a catch-all, but being a curator of ideas, right? And what we want to do with this is say, who isn't represented, right? What are the geographies? What are the racial identities? And what are the topics that aren't being represented here? And how can we bring that all to the pages of the publication? And, publishing opinion essays on areas of your expertise, right? So I'll talk about this a little bit more in the later parts of the presentation, but as I am framing out, who is the ideal Community Editorial Board member, I'm thinking about people who have two types of experience, lived experience and learned experience. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So let's talk about requirements and responsibilities. This is the biggest question I've been getting. I've been holding meetings with folks every Monday. And if you haven't had a meeting with me yet and you're interested in having a meeting, I have limited availability on Mondays, but you can check out the link at ctmirror.org/community editorial board and reserve 30 minutes with me to get your questions answered. But here are some of the things that we're requiring. What are your responsibilities? So we are expecting folks on the crew to write at least 6, but as many as 12 well-researched columns a year. And the phrase that I've been saying is well-researched, data-backed, and based in fact, right? So we are interested in folks adding to the discourse. And for us, that requires us to be well-researched, data-backed, and based in fact. Monthly editorial board meetings, not going to drain your time. Again, you'll hear me say this. We want to be as respectful of your time as possible. And we are also interested in bringing folks together to talk about events and say, all right, so this is going on here in my community. So-and-so has this going on in theirs. How can we, during these monthly board meetings, actually see who's working on what and start to percolate ideas? That meeting, I anticipate being about an hour and a half each month. Serving as community ambassadors. Right, you heard Bruce talk about this a bit earlier, but we want to have a better line of sight into communities around the state, right? It won't come as a surprise to you that CT Mirror is pretty, well situated in Hartford. Well, this is an avenue by which we can change that. And we are, or perhaps the interstate by which we can change that, right? So we're looking to get into your communities and we want you to serve as ambassadors to help us do that. So that might mean, if you are someone who frequents the BOE, right, the Board of Education meetings, bringing that back to our board meetings and tell us what's going on. If you're someone that, I don't know, has an interest in planning and zoning for some reason and has an interesting take on housing policy, bring that back to the Community Editorial Board. If there's a rumor about a food kitchen in your neighborhood that hasn't been distributing food, we want to know about that as well. But we can't have that line of sight from Hartford. And so we'll be utilizing your line of sight to help us in that endeavor. Provide critical insight to CT Mirror editors and reporters for their ongoing reporting efforts. So things can't work if they are siloed, right? And the Community Editorial Board can't be an arm of CT Mirror if it's an arm not attached to the larger body. And that larger body is the ongoing reporting efforts of the CT Mirror, the reporters, the editors. And so a great deal of that means in those monthly meetings, we'll be looking to you to bring ideas back to us to inform how we are reporting and also what we're reporting on. Social media engagement. So this is fun, right? What I'm interested in, and this is also the part that a lot of people will recoil at, so forgive me in advance, is how do we take, you know, that one column a month that you might be producing, or one column every 2 months that you might be producing, and actually take your voice and amplify it and engage with people in a sphere that can have some active and live commentary and discourse, right? How do we create this curated content and move it into a public square of sorts? So we'll be looking to host sessions of engage with the community editorial board members on this topic. And it could be an event that just happened, a trial that was just decided, right? You name it, right? But what we want to do is take your voice and bring it straight to our readers so that we can have that live exchange and represent CT Mirror on a local level. So here is a little bit of background on this, and Bruce, I'll have you dive in if you have anything to add on this point. But there may very well be folks who see your name on the pages of the CT Mirror site and recognize you as a member of the editorial board, and they might have a question about what's going on at the CT Mirror. And so, from our perspective, right, you should be that person's contact to get them to the right person at our publication. Bruce, did you have anything else you wanted to see on that?
No, that's perfect. That's exactly right. Yep.
Great. Okay, so this is something you already heard me say, but building a balanced board is incredibly important to us. And, you know, true to our commitment to equity and diversity, I'm going to be looking at the composition of the board from 3 angles of diversity: the geographic, racial, and topical, right? We are not going to build an entire board of education advocates. That's just the fact, right? And we're also not going to build an entire board of folks who are representing one racial identity or are all I'm from New Haven, right? So that doesn't help us reach our goal. So what you'll see us do is try to be as representative of the geography of the state. And when it comes to topics and racial identities, we're going to try to reflect deficiencies. That's not quite right. Yeah, I'll go that route. Deficiencies in how we're reporting now. Where can we be stronger, right? And whose voices can we represent a little bit more, right? And that's how we'll be tackling the avenues of racial and topical diversity. Anything to add to that, folks?
I do want to add one thing to that, Mercy, which is that this is really an opportunity for us to provide voice to people who don't already necessarily have voice. So, for example, if you work in a well-known advocacy organization and simply see the Community Editorial Board as another vehicle for publishing op-eds about your professional role in an advocacy organization, that's not really what we're looking for. What we're looking for are people we don't typically hear from and perspectives that we don't typically hear from.
That's right. So to add to that, there are darling children around the state whose names grace the pages of op-eds across the state. And we are happy that they are adding to the public discourse in those ways. Those might not be the individuals that we invite to serve on the board. The folks we're looking for are going to be folks who haven't historically had an opportunity to get those ideas and their voice highlighted in this way. Okay, so board members should avoid these 3 things, and we'll continue to talk about this in our first board meeting that will happen in December. But effectively, conflicts of interest, what Bruce just talked about, is an important piece. If you're representing an organization and let's say this organization is, being sponsored by X agency or is sponsoring a bill on X, Y, and Z, or is a lobbyist, or, what have you. And the 6 articles that you're submitting that year are about that specific bill that you're lobbying, right? Or somehow further the financial gains of your organization or yourself personally. We're actually asking, we won't be accepting pieces that do that. Additionally, avoid behavior that violates CT Mirror's code of conduct. Bruce, I'll stop here to let you talk a bit more about that. Or rather, I'll finish this last piece and then have you talk a bit more about the code of conduct. But then also speaking on, forgive this typo, speaking on behalf of the CT Mirror leadership without advance permission or discussion. So this is a big piece. If anything ever needs to be escalated to CT Mirror leadership, if anything ever needs to be discussed directly to a reporter, we're happy to help you facilitate that conversation or facilitate rather the escalation, right? But what we want to avoid as much as possible is having folks in the community talk on behalf of decisions at CT Mirror that they might not have the full picture on. Bruce?
Yeah, I mean, this is tricky. In terms of a code of conduct, I mean, we're happy to share the relevant elements of our employee handbook that are very much like any other employee handbook, and with an overlay of a journalism code of conduct in terms of not misrepresenting yourself. And I'll let Beth and Stephen have forgotten more about this than I ever knew, but so I'll let them talk about the journalism code of conduct. But just most broadly, it's not misrepresenting yourself and being fair and being accurate. And if you're going to be doing reported columns, then having sourcing that's all in line. The third bullet point is the tricky one, because on the one hand, the world of social media has kind of raised the issue of what is the responsibility or the constraints on an employee of an organization, for example, on social media vis-a-vis their employer. And you can, the purpose of the Community Editorial Board is not to be a place to critique the Connecticut Mirror, although we might try to find some other vehicle for perhaps doing that. But we would just ask that, if you have an issue with our reporting ultimately, that you talk with us instead of kind of airing that out publicly. That's the kind of relationship that we're trying to establish with members of the Community Editorial Board. Once your 1-year term is over, you can say whatever you want, and we will respect that. So Beth or Stephen, if you want to elaborate a little bit more on, kind of how you expect your staff to behave or conduct themselves, maybe that would help as well.
I'll speak to it briefly. I think that, if you're doing a reported column, for example, and you need to call someone up and interview them, or you're requesting information from a state agency, let's say it's data, you would call them up and you would identify yourself as a member of our community editorial board. You would be specific about who you are, not identifying yourself or representing yourself as a reporter in the news organization. And that's an important distinction. We are very careful as journalists about, especially when we talk to people who are not officials, not elected officials or state officials who are used to dealing with the press, that we make sure they understand that that we're writing down what they're saying, that we could quote them in an article. We have conversations with them about what that means. And we give them more leeway than we would, let's say, Governor Lamont when we're calling him. And so, just always remember to treat people with courtesy and respect. That's very important. And to be honest about what your role is. And if you have any concerns about your interactions with people that you're talking to, for whatever reason, you should bring them to Mercy or one of us, or Paul Stern, who's not on this call, who typically handles our viewpoints articles. And we'd be happy to talk through with you any concerns that you might have. Stephen, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add the one thing that I think should be said. It shouldn't need to be said, but I'm just going to say it anyway. There's the plagiarism issue that raises its head from time to time. Look, I don't expect anybody in this group is going to go lift somebody else's words paragraph for paragraph. It's just right. We don't need to talk about that, but there are subtle shades of this as well that you need to be cognizant of as you go through this. Can you reference somebody else's point of view broadly? Yeah. Should you cite it transparently in the work you're doing? Yeah, maybe. Look, in any event, if there's any question about working with another person's ideas or words from some other source, bring it to us. Let's talk about it. There's always a way to use it, and that's okay. I mean, one of the things that's so important to us is that we are transparent about what we write, what we research, how we cite it. So it's not necessarily a problem to be looking at other people's points of view and reflecting them in our stories, as long as we're transparent about that. But it's an absolute non-starter to lift somebody else's words from another, certainly from another publication.
On the point of transparency, we are going to be very clear as to who the members of the editorial board are. That'll be posted on our website for anybody in the public to see. And we'll want to include a little bit of biographical information as well to help people understand kind of what perspective you would be bringing to your publications, to your submissions.
Great. And as for our commitment to equity, you know, I had a thread about this on Twitter recently, and effectively it boils down to this. We're asking for your time and your thoughts, right? And we are embarking on this endeavor to curate high quality content from you. And it would be, in my opinion, unjust, but also just inequitable to do so without some compensation. And so for you know, an engagement of roughly 5 hours a month, we're going to be offering an annual honorarium of $600. And that roughly 5 hours is sort of more of an average, right? The months you're writing your column, you might be putting a little bit more time into it. But if you're writing 6 columns a year, you can sort of see how that would balance out. And that monthly community editorial board meeting, totaling about an hour and a half, we understand all of that is going to take time. And because of that, we want to be as equitable in soliciting your support and diversifying our perspectives and points of view. I'm going to move on from this slide unless you guys have anything else to say here. Great. So Stephen, you and I can double team these next pieces. Effectively, what we want to do now is give you a line of sight into some of the best practices in drafting opinion pieces. So Stephen, can I give you this actually to kick off with? One of the biggest things about drafting opinion pieces for us is we want you to bring your perspective. The easiest way to avoid the plagiarism we were just talking about is think through a topic on your own, right? Come to a opinion on your own, come to an conclusion on your own, and offer that to our audience. Stephen?
Yes. Well, I mean, I don't know. How deep do you want me to get into it at this juncture?
As the spirit moves you.
Well, look, I mean, broadly, we need to ask ourselves, I think, first, what's a good opinion piece? What do people want to read? Why are we doing this? What do we have to say? And as you, I mean, I don't think we're going to be assigning editorials, op-eds specifically to anyone in particular. We're looking for you to come to us with things you want to write about, perspectives that you can share that you think are relevant. There are a couple of different ways to do that. One is a personal essay is, hey, I have this kind of experience. It is unique. It is telling, it is relevant, and I'm going to share it with you. For example, a couple of years ago, when I was at the Hartford Courant, I asked Andrea Comer, whom some of you might know, to write a piece for us in the wake of the George Floyd murder. Andrea's husband is a Waterbury police officer, and she was in a really interesting place, right? She was kind of in between all kinds of currents. And that was perspective was absolutely unique. She wrote it beautifully. It was tender, it was sensitive, it was hard hitting, and it was a really strong piece. I can certainly put a link down or send it around at some point. That's one way to do it. Another thing to do is a strong policy piece. Aside from personal essays, I does not have to be in every column or op-ed. If you're drafting a personal column, sure, I is important. Doesn't need to be there. And in fact, I think there should be some sort of a distinction between personal essays that do use the word I and policy things that just don't. That you stay away from your personal experience if you have a strong policy argument to make based on, for example, your experience as an accountant or a Board of Education member or an elected official or something like that. In a situation like that, I may not be the right thing to use. So we can talk in a little bit more detail, maybe in a moment, about how to put some of those things into play. That's the first distinction I'll make. Does that work for you, Mercy?
That's perfect.
All right.
That's great. I'm going to break that down a little bit further into 4 buckets. And again, folks on the call here with me, as the spirit moves you, add to it. So number 1, you have to offer a strong opinion or a unique take on a current event or social issue, right? And when I say unique take, there are perspectives, there are opinions out there on critical race theory already. So if you're going to offer a column on critical race theory, come with something folks haven't heard before. And that actually might work that might work with the timeline. If you're producing once a month, or even better, once every 2 months, you get an opportunity to really sit in an idea, consume the information on that topic around you and say, all right, how can I approach this differently? Offer facts to contextualize and explain the issue. So like I said, data backed and steeped in fact, right? So what we're interested in is your line of sight from your personal perspective is absolutely the case. But if you are thinking about this issue and thinking about the audience that you're speaking to, what are the factoids that you can offer them that can help them understand the issue and further contextualize it? Provide emotional insight where possible. That where possible for me is really important, because I'm not interested in having folks, leach their hearts out on the page and sort of engage in a trauma porn for the consumption of others. That's not necessarily the case, right? But it does sometimes mean that your column, in order to make the point you want to make, needs to be more personal than it actually is. And so wherever possible, figure out how to pull yourself into that piece, and this is where emotional insight doesn't have to involve you. It can have you ask something from your reader, right? Figure out what is the thing you can offer to help the reader connect with this in a more emotional way. And then a call to action. Not every piece is going to have a call to action, right? But some of the really good ones have implicit calls to action, right? So my last piece, and not that I'm going to say mine is among the really good ones, but here's a fine example, right? So my last piece had an implicit call to action. It was, let's think about what we are, how we are equipping our students for a 21st century life if we aren't including critical race theory in their education, right? That's not go to your local board of ed meeting and, pick it outside, but that is, think about this for a moment and ask yourself this question. Stephen, Bruce, I saw your mic come off. I don't know if that means you were jumping at it again.
My mic never went off. I was going to the Q&A. I was reading some of the Q&A. It's very hard to mute me, as you know, Mercy.
You got stuff to add on that, Bus?
Yes. Let me just emphasize that first point at this moment. Offer a strong opinion. Offer a strong opinion. Say something. One of my friends who's a columnist, Mercy and I have had this talk. Always said when he was done writing it, he always asked himself, what am I saying? What am I trying to say here? And if you can get through your column and say in just a sentence, aha, that's what I'm trying to say, then you're on the right track. Weak opinion pieces waffle around. You know, they kind of discuss this and they say on the one hand and on the other hand and this and that. And at the end, it's just kind of bleh. And, you know, you're not left with anything. You're not left with a strong takeaway. Have an opinion. Hit hard. Let's hear what that is right at the top. And if at least you start structuring a piece like that, I think it's going to be more successful in the end. Okay, I'll stop.
No, it's all good. So defining expert opinion, for me, this is a big one because I talked about these two categories earlier. I want experts by lived experience and I want experts by profession or study. And you know, this slide could have existed in the section on our commitment to equity, right? Because you've heard the phrase before, journalists are gatekeepers. Journalism is a system of gatekeeping, right? And one way that is true is that the folks who are considered experts make it into the story, right? And so to challenge that, to open up, you know, who is represented in the pages of our publication, we have to challenge what it means to be an expert. So you could have studied the criminal justice system. You can have a PhD in criminal justice. You can also have a JD in criminal law, right? And that would make you an expert by professional or study. But if at age 12, you were in a fight and arrested here in Connecticut, and you've been in and out of the juvenile justice system until you were 18 for one reason or another, because you have, you know, found it difficult to be turned back around or find it difficult to find those resources that would support you in the long run, I think that makes you an expert on the intricacies of the justice system from the inside, right? You have lived experience that is useful in that piece. The difference here, when we're writing that piece and putting it together to be published, is making sure that you're being transparent about your limitations. And I think that is appropriate on both sides. If you haven't lived this experience, you can be transparent about that as an expectation, or as a limitation rather. And if you have not formally been trained on the topic, you can be transparent on that and offer your opinion. That's absolutely fine. Any pieces on that before I move on? Great. So here's something I'd like to put together. It's called the ABCs of opinion pieces. And we'll talk a bit about this. Attention, right? First, you want to start with the hook. What is the grabby, right, short and clear, hitting lead that you're going to offer people as a reason to keep reading, right? In journalism, we call this your lead. It is one of my favorite leads is out of the Tampa Bay area. I can't remember the reporter at the time, but she was covering crime in Tampa Bay. And that lead was Gary Jefferson died hungry. And it was about a shooting at a Popeyes, right? You might have known exactly what it was from the headline, but when you read that lead, you were going to continue reading because it grabbed your attention and it forced you to continue. Billboard, make an argument that is also going to provide some context, right? And so you can think of this as like, if you are driving down an interstate, you got to catch people's attention because you don't have it for a great deal of time. So give them the facts as quickly as you can. The who, what, where, when, and why, and how, all of that is considered your billboard. Broadcast that as much as possible. Context. This is where you can relate to people. This is where you can offer your data. This is where you can offer your research, your lived experience, your learned experience. But everything here is going to be offering additional insight to paint a full picture of that issue that you are putting forward. Demonstrate. Some pieces aren't going to have this, right? Some pieces aren't going to have ways that you can demonstrate from your own lived experience, but they will always have particularly in the pieces you'll be producing for CT Mirror, ways that you can support your argument with objective facts. So data-backed and steeped in facts, right? So for us, your opinions count, your opinions matter. This is all true, but I think that we've lived in a society in recent years that has, demanded less of us when it comes to facts. But your role as an editorial board member is going to be to get back to that, because facts matter in this case. And then equivocate. So we'll call this the to be sure paragraph, right? And effectively, it's going to at times counter the narratives that might be in there. Do so with restraint, because I often say you don't want to give those pieces, that counter narrative all of the breadth and all of the prime real estate of your piece. But if there's something that you want to address, go ahead and address it. I think that in a space of public discourse, right? If we're talking about a public square, someone's going to say something that you didn't like. And if there's a way that you can address it and offer objective facts to counter it, then that's absolutely okay. Every piece isn't going to do that. But when you do it, when you try, it's easy to, it must be done in a tactful way. Stephen?
Mercy. Yeah. Okay, a couple thoughts on this. You as a writer are in a fight with your readers for their time. You read opinion pieces, right? You read news stories. Everybody here does. You get through a couple paragraphs and you're bored to death, you're moving on to something else. It happens. It happens to me. It happens to all of us. We all do that. It's very few people that read all the way to the end. So it really is important to remember that as you work through these things, every word matters, every sentence matters, and every thought needs to have a point. It needs to come together into a cohesive whole. To that end, when I was writing editorials for the Hartford Courant, I had to remind myself, or people had to remind me, that I was not on a pulpit and I was not delivering a homily. Homily editorials or op-eds are not a lot of fun. they sometimes are not. So as Mercy said, fact-based, data-based arguments are very strong, because it's not only you pushing your point of view on somebody, but it's giving your reader the opportunity to take the facts as their own and to build that argument themselves. And ultimately, that's really what you want to do. You want the reader to have the opportunity to not only hear you, but embrace what you're saying.
If folks have been thinking about the exact issue that you're writing about, the best response that you can get is, now I know how to talk about this in a better way, right? Provide people with something else in their toolbox when talking about that exact issue.
So, right, and as you're building this, there is the tendency to want to be comprehensive, right? To think of all possible arguments against you that could weaken your case. I'm here to tell you, you do not have to be comprehensive with the opposing argument. You just don't. Yes, it's important to tip your hat to it. And Mercy's paragraph and equivocate there at the bottom. Sure, there's something to that. Nod to the opposition, say this is a point. However, bam, and shut it down, right? You know what you're talking about, and you should be able to do that. So yeah, do nod to the opposing point, right? But nod to it for reasons of demolishing that argument quickly and effectively, if that's the way you're working it. And finally, keep it short. Opinion pieces can bloat quickly and easily. As a guideline, 650 words, 700 words, somewhere in that neighborhood, it's generally about as much time as people are going to have to give you, and they will not read to the end. Do not save your best thing to the very end. Refer to it higher up, and do keep it short, because people's time is precious.
Beth, I saw your mic go off real quick.
Oh, I was
trying to keep it short.
I was going to make that last point. This is a issue that comes up with reporters too. You don't have to pour your entire notebook and all of your research into your story or your op-ed. You have to be selective. It's harder to do that, actually. It's harder to write short. So what we're asking you to do is not easy, but it's a lot of fun when you get good at it.
And there's this also the idea of easy enough imagery for you to adopt to understand what the point is here, but the inverted pyramid, give your media stuff first, right? Stephen mentioned it, like, don't save your best point to the end. This isn't dinner, right? We're not waiting till the dessert so that you can really see how broad of a chef I am in the kitchen. It really is, I want to know all of the media pieces of this meal, if I'm going to continue down that that metaphor, up at the top. And again, that's your billboard. That's the who, what, where, when, why, how, right? And put that all up in the top and leave some of those pieces of right, contextualized emotion, if you will, to the end. But you should never feel that if someone didn't get to that last period, they wouldn't understand the piece. If that's the case, then I and the other folks here on this call are likely going to support you in restructuring the piece so that it can fit that standard. All right, this is our last slide. And it's actually right on time because it is 7:26 and we can start taking questions. Kyle, I'm gonna have you come back on and triage us through the Q&A session.
As somebody who is a big fan of having dessert for dinner, I'm strongly in favor of leading with the dessert, as was expressed in that last point. So anyway, questions. We've gotten a number and we've started answering some of these questions here in the Q&A. So if you haven't been keeping an eye on that, we've already tackled some of these. If you'd like to ask a question out loud, feel free to use the raise hand feature. We're going to kind of alternate back and forth here between questions in the field, questions in the Q&A and questions out loud. The first question we're gonna take here is this question from Alan. Alan writes, the Mirror has clearly grown in reporting over the years. I think it started as a basic alternative to legacy print news and then expanded its resources and breadth of reporting. The reporting has also changed somewhat, I think, into more investigative in nature than just reporting. Is that true? And could you comment on the big picture focus for the Mirror so we can see how we fit into that picture appropriately? Beth, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yes, you're very observant. We started an investigative team over the last year, and members of that investigative team have been writing stories. But I would argue that the bent of a lot of the Mirror's reporting prior to the last year and a half has also been, if not investigative, accountability, kind of explanatory reporting that went beyond the typical just who, what, where, when, and why. And our journalists have always worked hard to provide that for readers. I don't know. I'll be interested to hear what Mercy and Stephen think of this, but I don't think that the members of the Community Editorial Board have to hone to the ethos or behavior of the news staff. You're a distinct thing, unless I'm misinterpreting that. And guys, feel free to speak up.
Mercy, you're muted.
You're muted.
If I ever write a book about this period of time, it's going to be called Still Muted. And because I said that on a call with 42 people, it's published. And so I don't want to see anyone on this call write a book before me called Still Muted. So Beth, in what way did you mean that have our board members adhere to the same standards?
No, I just mean that they don't have to be investigative reporters. Oh,
right. So, I'm a huge fan and sort of always have been a fan of a reported column where, there's a topic I want to dive into and I am calling several sources to either broaden or strengthen my perspective on that and also get their perspective and add that to my column. That won't be necessary for every piece that members submit to us. And so part of that is because it's going to be time consuming. If there's someone that you really want to highlight in your piece because you think they have a perspective to add, by all means, but it'll be incredibly time consuming if you are acting the same way that our investigative reporters do, particularly because it takes a long time to invest in all angles of a story. And I think the first few go arounds, it might be hard to distinguish what pieces need that background and what pieces need that sort of additional research. And so in our monthly board meetings, feel free to pitch that idea and we'll make that recommendation to you. It was like, you should talk to so-and-so on this. You know, who might be a great source to broaden your idea, strengthen your argument, this person, but it might not happen for every piece.
Great. Does anybody else want to weigh in here before we move on? I think we're good. All right. So Maria, just a second here. I'm going to press a button that's going to allow you to talk. So Maria, if you should be able to unmute your mic now, and we'd love to hear your question.
I'm pretty sick today. You guys don't want to hear me talk. I can't even talk. I'm in the meeting, but today is not the best day for me. But I didn't want to miss it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. So Maria, what's your question for us? Maria, did we lose you?
Yeah, okay, I'm back. I was gonna ask if there is a way that we can write in Spanish for the Hispanic community.
Great question. Mercy, do you want to take that one?
I'm going to kick that to Bruce and Beth.
Okay.
To be honest, we hadn't really thought about that. It's a very interesting idea. And I think we will embrace the challenge of figuring out how to do that.
I would agree.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question, Maria. That's great. All right. So next up, we're going to go ahead. We have a question here from Harry. So Harry asks, how or where would an investigative piece fit into your mission? For example, my community is currently part of the newspaper desert, and we have no media vehicle that explores and dives into issues. So I guess the question is more around, so how can the Community Editorial Board sort of address this sort of newspaper desert issue?
Yeah.
Mercy, do you want to tackle that?
I'll do that. And then, feel free to jump in. I think in two ways, right? If you see things going on in your community that needs investigating, right, you've got a direct line of access to the folks who would do that kind of thing. And right, so those sorts of tips coming from effectively our ambassadors on the ground can be easily escalated up to our reporters. Our reporters is my first answer. The second answer is, if you have the time, right, and you're interested in taking a stab at investigating that, we can absolutely equip you with the tools needed to track it down to some degree, right? Be mindful about your investment of time there. Again, it's not easy, and it's not a short investment of time. But if you're interested in that, we can absolutely give you pointers on, right, how to file an FOI request or who in the city might have that information. I'm going to take the slide down, Kyle, just so folks can see our faces now.
Yeah, sure. Do either the editors or Bruce, do you want to chime in on this? All right, moving along here. Teresa asks, are we able to bring in folks with lived experience to co-author pieces for which we have professional knowledge or experience?
That's really interesting. I think the way that I would approach that is the piece is yours, and I would invite that person that has lived experience to be a source in your piece, right? And we can walk you through what interviewing them looks like, and I can even offer my time to sit with you in that interview so that you can get a really good set of questions going in their direction in a conversation that you can then bring back and build into the piece. But effectively, the piece is yours. to build from the ground up, and that byline will be yours. Bruce, does that sound right?
Awesome. So great question here from Deidre. Deidre asks, although we are a community board, what other ways are you increasing your diversity within your staff? Will you be hiring more individuals with diverse background or accepting diverse interns? I'll kick this to Bruce or Beth, or both. I think there's a lot happening here. So,
Beth, not to put you on the spot, but if you want to do that one, you can, or I will, whichever.
I mean, yeah, the answer to the question is yes. It's part of our ongoing and broad diversity efforts. It's something that we have been thinking about a lot and working hard to figure out how to recruit more diverse candidates for our newsroom, and both as full-time employees and as interns. We've done a number of different things. Bruce, if you want to be more detailed about it, go right ahead. But the answer to both questions is yes.
Yeah, no, I think that's sufficient for now. I'll just reiterate. It's important for us. We think about diversity in many different ways. We think about it in terms of coverage. What topics are we covering? Are we covering topics that are important to a diverse audience? We think about it in terms of impact. Is our reporting having impact on diverse audiences? We think about it in terms of sourcing. We think about it in terms of staffing. We think about it in terms of board. We think about it in terms of readership. We even think about it in terms of vendors. So really across the board, it's important for us, like I said at the beginning, to reflect all of the people of Connecticut across all of the different disciplines of our organization.
Last but not least, one last question from Teresa here. In what feels like an anti-fact environment, what can we expect as members of the CEB? Mercy, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I do. And let me go back and read it, because the way that I read it, Teresa, sounded like, what else can you expect, in response to an earlier slide about needing to be well-researched and fact-based, and the last few years sort of fueling an environment when that wasn't necessary. Was that like a cosign, or were you asking a specific question there? Can you invite Teresa to have her mic, turn her mic on?
Yeah, just a second here. Let's see. Oh no, it looks like wait, hand is raised, allowed to talk. And Teresa, you should be able to unmute.
Yes, I think that a lot of us are struggling in the current environment to have a reasonable and fact-based dialogue when there's a lot of skepticism and a lot of not trust in the media. I mean, I think the Connecticut Mirror is probably a little bit different than some of the other media outlets, because I think there's a filter are heading toward that particular venue are hopefully a bit more educated or a bit more open-minded than maybe the Hartford Courant or some of the other venues in the state. But yeah, I think it's just helpful to know what we might expect in terms of pushback, feedback, especially some of us who are in professional positions where we're a voice not just for ourselves, but for the institutions that we're affiliated with. Just what your sense of that might be.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I think the CEB is our best effort at combating that, right? And what you can expect is probably some growing pains. I think folks are going to, or are used to, seeing opinion pieces in publications throughout the state that are anything from factless to slanderous. And so it'll get really, it will, on our side, be imperative for us to ensure that, right, the conversation that we're putting forward is based in, look, the art, if you object to this opinion, well, you're not objecting to the opinion, you're objecting to the fact that here are the articles that back this, right? And so I guess you make another point about, you know, backlash or sort of the conversation after that. I think if you are a person that engages in social media, people are going to engage with your piece. People are going to reach out to you and ask you questions about your piece. They might ask you to clarify, right? And that's why it's really important to create a strong opinion that is sort of strong in the research as well. So you're not actually just relying on, look, this is what I saw and this is how I feel. You're relying on, this is based off of, you know, decades of research in this sector, or this is based off of, you know, my conversations with these folks that I've interviewed for this piece, or this is based off of my years of experience doing a specific thing. And I think we don't really know. This is a bit of an experiment.
Sure.
Right. There are pieces that are going to be new to us along the lines like, oh, we didn't expect that to happen, but cool. Now we know and we can respond to that. And, you know, that's a little bit of what we're asking folks that's a little bit of the journey that we're asking folks to join us on, right? Be a part of this experiment and figure it out with us.
I'd like to add something, which is that, you know, you can present all the facts in the world, opinion, and people are still going to tell you that you're wrong. And sometimes they're going to do it in a way that is not very polite. And sometimes they're going to pick a fight. And at a certain point, you get to choose how, when, or if you're going to engage. And my journalists typically will engage up to a point. And then when they realize that the other person isn't interested in what they have to say or fact or anything really except yelling, they shut it down. And I would say that all of us get to choose our own levels of tolerance for that kind of behavior. I have very little. So I tend to exit, you know, I will rebut once and then I exit if it's not a rational conversation. And so you get to make that decision, and you don't have to put up with abuse. You really don't, and you shouldn't.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was exceptionally well said, Beth. The trolls are going to troll. Haters
Well,
are
especially, you know, especially women and people of color, they will come in for more vitriol, and you have to, you know, we know that as journalists. And so it's can get a little ugly. I got into it with a guy on a walking trail on Sunday in my hometown who was 83. And I exited the conversation very pleasantly, but quickly.
Get out, walk.
There's a follow-up question here from David Blitz that I'll just go ahead and highlight. Is there going to be a public comment section on the opinion pieces? We don't have comment sections on our pieces on the publication. Is that right?
Well, we've taken comments for all of the reasons Beth just kind of articulated. We've taken comments down. However, we do post all of our stories and all of our opinions on social media.
Yep.
And it's the Wild West. And you can choose to read the social media commentary on your piece or not, but there will be comments there.
And I'll say, right, this is a reporting staff that might comment on your behalf, right? They may very well take the piece tweet it out themselves and right, like make a comment on that piece themselves, right? So folks from the Mirror are going to highlight the work as well. And if you have a very, very, very small appetite for social media engagement, that can be taken into account as well. In my experience writing columns, every Monday, when the column published, it was like, all right, time to chow down on these vitriolic comments, or because I have a really high tolerance for that. And I'm sort of moved by, or maybe humored by I moved you to the point of pulling out your computer, and that humors me. But not everyone, but not everyone feels the same. And yeah, echoing Beth's point that you've got to set your barometer in that.
There is no doubt that writing a column and publishing your own thoughts in any publication is an act of bravery. Just is. And the more honest you are, the harder it can be. But it's okay. It is rewarding in its own. Of course, there's going to be pushback, as Beth really said very well. That's fine. I tend to let it happen in somewhere else, somewhere that I'm not paying attention to. I know our stories draw some rancor from time to time by people on opposite sides. It's fine. I am totally okay with that. Even if people don't bring facts to the argument, I'm also okay with that. I don't like the vitriol, but I like that we are inspiring a conversation. And I hope that our bravery in putting our own thoughts forth will help ameliorate the sharper edges a little bit.
Just want to add one other thing to that, which is that what would be the home run for us is if an opinion piece that you wrote, instead of attracting comments on Facebook or Twitter or wherever, were to instead inspire someone else to write a 600 to 750 word opinion piece, offering their perspective that's different from the one that you wrote. That is what this is all about. That's
the conversation.
Looking at this last question coming in here from Barbara Fair. I've learned because I speak on issues people have difficulty facing, I can expect nasty comments, so I simply state my case and I don't seek out responses. Cognitive dissonance is real. I can't agree more. Less of a question, more of a comment. Can't agree more. Thank you for that, Barbara. As we wrap up here, can't thank you all enough for your time and investing in us here today to talk about where the CEB came from, where we're hoping to go, and what it would take for you to be a part of it. I just want to vocalize that there are 2 weeks left to get your application in. And if you haven't, the application deadline is December 1st. And you can access that application and the job description at ctmirror.org/CEB or ctmirror.org/Community Editorial Board. Both links work. After that, selectees will be notified on December 13th. And please save this date. The first editorial board meeting will be December 17th in the evening in a virtual space just like this. If you have any additional questions, please visit that link that Kyle just dropped in the chat. Reserve time with me on Mondays, and I'd be happy to answer additional questions you may have. Any final remarks, folks?
great job, Mercy and Stephen and Beth and Kyle.
Well, thanks for everybody for participating.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Great to see a good crowd.
Thanks, everyone.